Hello everybody and welcome to my literary Koronakeittiö streaming from Helsinki. You are welcome to join in any spoken language. I'll answer your questions, but today I'm answering your questions in English. And today I'm gonna make something very simple. I'm gonna introduce a traditional way of dyeing eggs from Estonia. So it's this traditional way of dyeing eggs is also known elsewhere in the world as well, but not as much in Finland. So this is definitely Estonian tradition. I'm gonna use onion peels to dye eggs, and they will be beautifully marbled. But this is marbled by me, and I'm not as skillful as my mother is, so they might be not as beautiful as hers. I started to run this Koronakeittiö when all my events were cancelled. I was supposed to travel from March to midsummer, and I had been writing since Christmas, so I was very much looking forward to meeting all the readers, signings, festivals, fairs. Even though author's work is very much done in isolation, there's a limit to isolation as well. So I was actually looking for human interaction, but now I'm gonna be interactive with you. Over the past few weeks, I've been preparing different sorts of dishes in my Koronakeittiö and talking about books, my favorite books, giving reading recommendations for this time of staying at home, and also talking about how I became an author. And therefore I also want to introduce to you a very important book to me. This children's book, Estonian children's book called Egg, so suitable for Easter time as well, is a classic in Estonia. And I actually, I slept with it, so it was my bedtime toy. Others had teddy bears and dolls, but I had a book. And at the time, of course, I was not able to read, so I have no idea why I picked this one and why it became something made me sleep so well. It's a simple story as the children's stories tend to be, but it has a happy ending, and in that way it's kind of uplifting. But I think why I became so fascinated by this one is probably because perhaps it's the animals, the hens and the cat, but it might be also simply the colors. Because the colors are, they are basic, but they are also very bright. So and so it's not very Nordic or Scandinavian. Some Scandinavian children's books have less colors, and perhaps it had something to do with that. I don't know. I'm not actually a cat person. I'm more like a dog person. So it has actually nothing to do with the cats, most likely, I think. But anyway, this was kind of the beginning of my path to becoming an author. And then, when I became older, I got so much fascinated by historical fiction, definitely very entertaining historical fiction, especially Angelique. She was a very important person to me, a literary character. Of course, I did love the movies as well, but the books, especially Angelique by Serjan Golon, was, I think she was a hero, a literary hero to me, because she was a survivor, definitely, an adventurer, and she was able to cope with all kind of mishaps. Whatever happened, she just kept on going. So I think that might have been the case. But of course, I've always loved France. So that's obviously for one reason. But I was very young when I was reading Angelique, so I had never visited France. But when I went to Paris for the first time when I was 18, I did visit the places Angelique had visited as well. So in that way, her adventures have also been my travel guide to France as well. Later on, I've had other literary travel guides for sure, but this was kind of this was my guide to France when I was 9-10 years old. That's when I started to read Angelique, pretty young actually. And then of course I did have other important literary heroes as well, but when I think about the authors that have influenced me later on, then maybe I'll say, well, for one is definitely Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, probably because his language is so direct. This Gulag is the alma mater of Gulag literature, and his language is very fierce. I did like his other novels as well, but there is energy in this one, and also because this was one of the first books probably where someone was writing so directly about gulags and Siberian camps. Because when I was brought up, people were, when I think about the spoken language, people were using euphemisms. So people were talking about people who were taken or people who were sent to the cold land. So that there were a lot of euphemisms around the subjects, but he was talking directly. So that was one of my guides to direct expression. And then one of the important authors to me was, of course, Marguerite Duras, because her language is very musical. This edition is the English one, and I've read her books in Finnish, but I actually was reading her books in French. Now my French is very rusty, but at the high school I was reading her novels in French, and that taught me a lot about the musicality of the language. I think Finnish language is very musical, but I kind of understood the musicality and its potential in fiction through her. So definitely she's one of the most important authors that have affected my literary style as well, and the understanding of the musicality. And then one Finnish author, definitely important for understanding or sensing the language, is Aino Kallas. Aino Kallas was unique and still is in Finnish literary world. She was Finn, but she wrote about Estonia. In that way, I'm a bit like her, but she was using archaic language, which was unusual for the time. So when she was writing about legends, old Estonian legends, then she was using the language of those legends. And that was also kind of something important for me to understand. At the time, I think I was 18 or 19 when I I was definitely at high school when I first read her work, and I understood that actually you can write contemporary novels even though you are using language from different periods. And that was a kind of revelation to me. So there are plenty of different ways to write historical fiction. Historical fiction is definitely something I definitely love, and therefore I was one of my contemporary favorite authors writing historical fiction is Sarah Waters. Sarah Waters has an excellent eye on historical details. She has the ability to make history very much alive. So definitely that's something I would recommend to you. But now there's a question. Oh yes, and there was a question, have I read the book called Anne Frank's Diary? And yes, I have, but it was a long time ago and it didn't actually have the impact on me that perhaps to... I know there are a lot of people who have been very much influenced by her diary. And of course, diaries are extremely important, and therefore I encourage everybody to write about this weird period we are living in at the moment. In Finland, the Society of Literature is actually collecting people's memories about this Corona spring, and I have contributed myself as well, because diaries in a written form are actually kind of disappearing. So her diary is an example, Anne Frank's diary is an example of the importance of diaries, also for the future, and definitely for the future. So they are kind of messages to the future and to the future generations. And actually now we're talking of Anne Frank, I just finished an excellent book called The Undertaking, by Audrey Magee. I don't know actually how her last name is pronounced, but she's an Irish author. And this, it's also available in Finnish, if there are Finnish people watching this. In Finnish it's Sopimus, but in English it's The Undertaking. And it's about two ordinary German and their way, and how they are operating in a system. The other one is the German soldier and then the German lady. It's not a nice read, but it's an excellent read. So definitely that was a book recommendation to you. But now I'm going to work with eggs. It's very simple. Usually I've spent my Christmas time in Finland, also as a child, and of course as Finnish kids they ate the chocolate eggs, but Estonian kids didn't have at the time chocolate eggs, so also that was one of the reasons probably why the tradition was kept so much alive with dyeing the eggs with onion peels. So I have onion peels here, and if you want to prepare eggs for Easter, then it's good time to start to collect the onion peels, because you need quite a lot of them. Red ones are great, but different colors make different marbles, so different dyeing. And this is also a very good way to dye eggs, because it doesn't stain. So it's simple, easy, and doesn't stain. Then you need newspapers, because we are going to wrap the eggs and the onion peels into a newspaper. You can use cheesecloth as well, so cheesecloth is just fine. The reason also why I've been seeing this Koronakeittiö now for a few weeks, and of course I wanted to do something to compensate my cancelled events, but also the idea of how I started why to do the Koronakeittiö now. The idea came up also to my head when I was watching Finnish people doing their groceries. And a couple of weeks ago, also Finns started panic buying toilet paper. And not only when it comes to toilet paper, Finland is actually self-sufficient. We don't have much natural resources, except for the green goal, and that is the forest. And the forest means that we have plenty of toilet paper. So in that way, it was a psychological reaction. There was no need to hamster toilet paper, but people are also starting to stockpile canned food. And I was thinking how people have lots of crushed tomatoes and tuna at home. And I was thinking that they are going to be very fed up with the tuna sooner or later. So my food ideology in my Koronakeittiö is to focus on ingredients with long shelf life, and also to ingredients that most likely most people actually have at home, so you don't have to rush to the store to get something to be able to prepare. So that's and of course also this was a good way to introduce some of the ingredients more known in Estonian kitchen or in Ukrainian kitchen or in Russian kitchen, more likely be more known in Eastern European countries. So that's why I've been pickling, for example. This was the pickle I made yesterday. Quick pickled tomatoes and red onions. The onion peels are here now. Pickling is a very traditional method in many Eastern European countries, or preserving food. And of course, I've written a lot about preserving food in my novels. Also, of course, there's always the symbolic meaning as well, preserving memories or preserving past. They might be also one of the symbolic meanings of preserving food. So, please do send me questions if you have any. Actually, my latest novel, Dog Park, this is the Finnish cover. There's only one out, but the first translation just came out in Norway, and I did miss the Norwegians I was supposed to meet. But now there's a question. Two excellent questions. Do I have a favorite Swedish author, and when did I know when I wanted to become an author? It was after I had been sleeping with the book. I learned to write and read when I was 6, and immediately after that I understood that I wanted to become an author. And I have no idea where the idea of being an author came, because of course I did. My mother read books to me. I had been very eagerly going to the local library. So I did enjoy books as objects. I played with them, even though I wasn't able to read them. And I was already, at the time before I learned to write and read, I did create stories. I wanted to create stories in my head. But when I learned to write, I started to have a diary. And at the age of 6, of course, the diary was more like, it was about with whom I had been playing or what I had been playing and things like that. And then I just started writing. But the first fictional stories I think I wrote when I was already at school. And then I did have a sort of a smallish crisis in this idea of becoming an author. As a child, I did have one crisis when I was actually reading a children's magazine, and there was a list of favorite professions by children, and for some unknown reason they mentioned author as the most popular profession, and that was kind of shock to me, because I didn't know anyone who, except for myself, who wanted to become an author, and that's why I was a kind of realistic child, realistic in a way that I didn't want to dream for something that wouldn't be possible, and I was thinking that that it would be impossible for me to become an author if everybody else wants to become an author as well, and yeah, obviously I was, for some unknown reason, aware of that everyone's books are not published, so. So that's definitely, that was a bit shock to me. However, later on I understood that perhaps it was just that children, the paper perhaps wanted to, educate children to read more perhaps. So after that I have been very determined to become an author. This was not a very good thread, but I'm going to do that. Trick. So perhaps you should make sure that the thread is strong enough so that you can wrap it. But yes, the question about the Swedish authors. I was going to mention a few Swedish authors. Well, one, Jens Lapidus, is definitely one of my favorite crime authors in Sweden. This is the pocket edition, Finnish pocket edition. Probably because of his language and dialogue, and his criminals. They are very much alive, and the language is something that makes the characters feel alive, and you actually are able to identify with them, and so definitely the language is one of the things that made Jens Lapidus as one of my favorite Swedish crime authors. And then now I'm going to put this parcel into a pot. So I just toss it here, and then I put it. I bring the water to boil, and now I don't need to do anything except wait for the egg to become beautifully marbled and Easter, and bringing some Easter and spring vibes to this weird time. Yes, Jens has excellent dialogue. And now I want to actually mention one of the new Swedish authors I have been enjoying a lot lately, and that's Lina Bengtsdotter. Lina has also excellent dialogue. And even though I'm not that much into crime fiction where there are a lot of policemen, then actually she has a very interesting and lively protagonist. She is a police, but this is definitely worth to check. And then, of course, for example, Malin Persson-Giolito and her excellent work is definitely worth reading. They're also important ones, very important stories, and yet entertaining. So sometimes that's difficult to make an entertaining, captivating, and important story. Now there's a question. Yes, the question was if I'm worried about young people reading too little, and that is something that has been under this discussion in Finland. Finland is very proud of good education and our excellent library system. But it seems like the children are reading less. They are most likely actually producing more text and writing more than ever before, thanks to chatting online. I'm not sure if I'm worried about that, because when you think about, for example, the new era of excellent TV series, then the quality is actually pretty good. And when you think about the how a good story affects you, then you need to have a good story. You need to have the whole fictional world, and then you need to have characters you can identify with yourself. And then the story could be located on as remote country as ever, on another continent. It could be set in a historical era, but you can still identify with the character, and then you can understand the world the character is living in much more. And that's kind of the power of art and stories. And I think a good quality TV series has the same effect. But of course, when you think about the development of the individual language and the vocabulary, then you should go for the books. But on the other hand, there have always been people who haven't read. So I'm actually super happy about the good quality of TV shows, because that makes stories more accessible, let alone the audiobooks, which also make enjoying the stories more, it makes just stories more accessible to people who are not that much into reading. But if you want to have a tip for someone who's not reading as much as you would hope, then, for example, Malin Persson-Giolito's Quicksand is definitely worth a try. And then, for example, Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro is high-quality literary piece of work. The language is really beautiful, and at the same time, I think it's very accessible also for younger people. But now I'm gonna wrap it up. Hopefully, my marble egg will be beautiful. I will post instructions on my Instagram and on my Facebook later on if you want them. And also, I'm writing the book list as well. But if you want to check my previous recipes and then the future recipes from my Koronakeittiö, I've written down them in English as well, both on my Instagram and Facebook. Now there's time for one last question, if there's any. There is. Question about Camilla Grebe. I haven't actually, but she's on my list, definitely. I'm quite often people are asking what you should read if you want to become an author, for example, and my answer is that you need to read everything. You need to read and bad books and good books. You need to read. You need to be familiar with the different genres as well. As I said, that my big great love is the historical fiction. But I do read a lot of crime as well. I try to read as much translated fiction as possible because I want to know what's happening all around the world. And then I'm reading also very boring books. Boring books in that sense that I need also boring books for my background research. So I'm also reading statistics and weird old leaflets, and especially I'm a fan of old cookbooks, old women's magazines, and old sex guides. They are actually excellent read because they are giving you a picture of the world where they were written, and also old medical books, and also old handbooks or guidebooks for housewives, because they are giving a lot of practical information about how people were actually, for example, cleaning their homes like 100 years ago. They didn't have the equipment we have right now. So I'm reading all kinds of different things. But if I want to enjoy reading, then I definitely want to read the books on paper. And now I'm going to give you a few more book tips, reading recommendations. Svetlana Alexievich has also been a very important author to me. If you have watched the TV show Chernobyl, then you should definitely read her books. And Chernobyl has been kind of small detail in my previous novels as well. Now my latest novel is focusing on Ukraine, so I was asked last fall when the book came, so why Ukraine? But Ukraine is actually, from Estonian point of view, much closer than closer as a culture and as a country than from Finnish perspective, and also like the big events that took place in Soviet Union. They are also kind of unifying experiences because people were sent to Chernobyl also from Soviet Estonia. So in that way, it has been a detail in my previous novels as well. But Svetlana Alexievich is, I was so happy for her Nobel Prize. She's a documentary novelist and definitely worth a read if you want to know what's happening, or if you want to understand the recent progress in Russia. Then one of my favorite contemporary authors is definitely Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. The way she writes about the migrant experience is very easy to identify with, for me, for example, and also the way she writes about the recent past is very well. I mean, the story is not the stories are not exactly happy ones, but very accessible. I love the way she is so accessible, and she's also very active in other important matters. And now the last reading recommendation is Suleika Opens Her Eyes. I love this book so much that I have been recommending this to everybody for a year. It's a deportation story. Mostly taking place in a deportation train on the way to Siberia. But what makes this special in this genre is that one of the main characters is actually a Muslim girl, And then there's also weird humor that, or black humor, and also it includes one of the most tragic Red Army officers in a literary world. So this is definitely a good read. Now I'm gonna wrap it up. Thank you for joining me. And tomorrow I'm gonna be I'm streaming Koronakeittiö in Finnish, and I do hope to see you all again somewhere on this globe. So stay safe and greetings from Helsinki.